Really excited. It's been an awesome week of following along with these the presentations in the clinic. So it's really excited for the opportunity. And thanks, of course, to Chris Oliver for inviting me and for really putting this together. It's been awesome to see, and Tanner and your team, of course. So kick things off here, and I'll get started just with a quick intro and a little bit of what I do at Canada Basketball. So as Tanner mentioned, I'm the performance analyst and database manager, and have been for the past 4 years with our team. So anything on the men's high performance side on the men's national team. So as early as our junior academy, which is as young as grade 7, all the way through to a senior national team. So I manage the analytics and research and our database and any video analysis that happens for any of those teams. It changes a little bit between competition, both in and out, but focusing a little bit today on some of the trends that have happened in international competition specifically. And when we are in competition, I do travel with the senior men's national team and provide feedback to the coaching staff in terms of any reporting that we do, any analysis, help scout our upcoming opponents, and review our own team performances, among a couple of other things. So so let's kick things off a little bit here. Started. Awesome. So what I'd like to talk about today is along the lines of what I mentioned in terms of offensive trends in FIBA basketball and international basketball, and then more specifically the topic of shot selection and shot quality. So I'm going to break that down into 3 key characteristics here. So we'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail. But first off, we'll talk about shot location. So that's anything along the shot spectrum that I'm sure many people have seen and been familiar with in the past. We'll break that down a little bit deeper and drill down into shot quality as well, and then following up with adding an element and a layer of context into that. So, not all shots are created equal, and the type of context that comes in from whether it's a transition opportunity, a spot up, and isolation, all provide different outcomes when we're talking about shot quality and efficiency. So break that down a little bit. Hopefully, give you some insights from that that might be something that you can take back to your teams and context and have a little bit of value there. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we use this information and think about it within Canada Basketball and our men's high performance team specifically, and then provide some trends and numbers from international basketball and what sort of the lay of the land looks like in FIBA, both from a senior team standpoint, and then some of the things that we see as characteristics as early as U16 with U16 FIBA Americas, and then through the U19 World Cup. So to kick things off here, we'll talk about shot location. And I'm going to put on the screen the shot spectrum. So I'm sure many people are familiar with this. I was listening to Coach Triano's talk on this past Friday, and he presented a similar idea from the Minnesota Timberwolves practice court. So I'm not going to spend too much time diving into this. It's just to provide a little bit of a lay of the land here, and to show what the numbers look like in the FIBA setting. So you'll notice that the hierarchy here is the same as in the NBA and in the numbers that Coach Triano provided. It's basketball, and the goals of getting to the free throw line, getting to the rim, and then you have your corner 3-pointers, and all that follows are pretty much the same thing really in terms of that hierarchy. A couple of things to note specifically with this is that the FIBA numbers across the board are a little bit lower than the NBA numbers. For example, NBA rim is in the area of 140 points per 100 possessions. Corner threes are about 135. And then all the way across the board, slightly lower. There's a variety of different reasons for why that may be the case. I'm not going to focus in on those differences too much today, but anything from the lines of, talent, athleticism, the difference in rules might come into play in that as well. So, this is the shot spectrum that we're thinking about when we're talking about shot location specifically in the FIBA game. And to layer that down in a little bit more detail, so you'll see the number that popped up on the screen there. So 23 attempts per game is approximately what FIBA medal winning teams are shooting in terms of free throw per games at the most recent FIBA competition. 44% of shots are right at the rim, 7% corner threes, and then all the way through to the mid-range jump shots. So it's approximately 30 shots at the rim, 23 three-pointers in the FIBA game per game, and then about 9 mid-range attempts. So just to give you the basics, a little bit of the lay of the land, and it's going to frame some of the other stuff that we'll be talking about throughout this presentation. So as a next step here, in terms of importance and, why did I present this? Why are we kind of talking about this information? So once we have the lay of the land in terms of the shot location information, it's about aligning it with your team personnel strengths and really finding ways to maximize the offense based on the individual abilities and the skill level of your athletes. Keeping an eye to the average numbers that were presented in that previous slide in terms of the shot spectrum. So of course, there's not one size fits all and one single approach to this. There's different ways of going about shot selection and determining your targets and all of that depending to the strengths of your team. Ultimately, the goal, of course, is driving an efficient style of play as possible within the confines of the strengths and weaknesses that you've identified within your roster. And then, of course, setting targets. You can't only consider the numbers in terms of the volume, like I mentioned, okay, we're going to get to the rim 30 times per game, or we're going to shoot certain free throws, but how does that really fill in with what I mentioned previously in terms of the ability of your team and kind of the personnel that you have in your disposal? It's easy to say you're going to shoot 43 pointers a game, but if you don't have the personnel to do that, you might not be maximizing your efficiency in that particular area. So where do we use this information within Canada basketball and within some of our contexts? So frequently in setting targets there that are mentioned, but this comes in post-game reporting, team performance evaluations, a ton of information that you can track and identify in order to see exactly what's valuable. Preparing for opponents, an individual player assessment are some of those examples. So again, what are the limitations of this shot spectrum? I've only showed 5 areas on the court, and at the end of the day, these are average numbers. They look different for different teams, they look different for different players, and they ignore a couple of key important considerations that we're going to drill down to in a little bit in the presentation, but specifically context. It doesn't talk about, what type of shot. The corner 3 is identified, but is it a catch and shoot? At the top, is it off the dribble? Is it coming in transition? Is it coming in isolation? Is it at the end of the game? Is it at a particular time in a specific quarter? What is the situation in terms of the foul, the lead of the opponent, and all of that? So all of those considerations come into play when you consider how open a shot is, how contested. All of those are important considerations in terms of context, and we'll get into them in a little bit of detail in this presentation. As well, just things to consider when someone presents a broad sort of location spectrum moving forward. So a couple of trends that I'll just identify here in terms of what we've seen in international competition over the past couple of years. So Coach Chano as well mentioned the increase of pace and efficiency in the NBA over the last decade. And there has been a noted increase in pace at the senior level of competition in FIBA as well. Nowhere near the change really that's happened in the NBA with sort of the change in the style of play and the volume of 3-pointers attempted as it compares to different field goal attempts, and really the speed of the game has increased a lot. It has changed in FIBA basketball, but not to the same extent. FIBA also has competitions at a lot less frequent interval, and the most recent, of course, being the 2019 World Cup, and then before that is the 2016 Olympics. So any changes that happen are really, I always focus in on sort of best competitions, which is called, those international top level competitions, the Olympics and the World Cup. The best players are playing, and that's where you can really get the most accurate numbers in terms of the level of competition. But of course, the FIBA tournament's only really 7 or 8 games compared to an 82 game season in the NBA and playoffs. So FIBA data is usually a little bit more you'll see a little bit more fluctuation based on the players that are playing and the competition and all of that. So there has also been an increase in 3-point rate over the last couple of competitions in FIBA, but there hasn't been sort of a corresponding change in efficiency if we're looking at the broad numbers, effective field goal percentage in these competitions, offensive rating of the teams. It has been more or less similar over the last couple of years, so not sort of what you've seen in some of the NBA competitions. And if we drill down a little bit into age groups, so when I say age group, anything U16 all the way through U19, you do see some of those similar trends at the U19 level, but not as much at the U16, U17 level. But I will point out Canada is ranked second overall in the world in our age group teams, so anything from U16 to U19. And we do attempt among the most 3-pointers in these age group competitions. Our 3-point is high, and we do have one of the best efficiencies in terms of 3-point percentage, excuse me, in these tournaments. So it is sort of inherent to our style of play as well, and that's been interesting to observe how that's sort of changed over time. So I'm going to provide a little bit of a brief aside here for the moment from this, and just talk about our junior academy quickly. So many are familiar. Our junior academy is the entryway, really, we call into our podium pathway program, into our podium pathway, excuse me. It's a program for athletes in grades 7 and 8. It is based in Ontario, but we also do have other junior academies across the country in different provinces. And our goal with this is to create an environment that replicates really what it means to be on the national team, and replicate that environment for the athletes that take part in it. So the purpose of me introducing this right here is to give an example of how we might use some of this information that identified previously in terms of the shot spectrum and some of the knowledge and understanding we have of the FIBA game to filter down into our programs and impact the development at these particular age groups. So an example of how we use this, I'll show a quick video coming up here from our one of our junior academy sessions last year. And this is an advantage transition drill 3-on-2 continuous. And we've changed the scoring a little bit to reflect some of that shot selection hierarchy. And you'll see, and many coaches, of course, done this in the past. And, Coach Triano mentioned this, that this is something that happens with his team as well. And, layups, for example, setting the value to be 5 points, 3-pointers, 4 points, for example, playing around with that all the way through to, your pull-up mid-range jump shot being perhaps 0 points, but the athletes get the ball back if they score. So playing around with all of those to introduce some of these concepts. And key, of course, at this age group is not necessarily the fact that the 3-pointer is where it is, but emphasizing really the proper spacing, the ball movement, and playing around with the weighting of these drills has helped achieve some of these goals. So I'll jump to the next slide and quickly show this video here. There we go. So like I mentioned, we've set up an advantage 3-on-2 continuous drill. The camera is a little bit shaky, but you'll notice the spacing. And again, it is 3-on-2. They do have an advantage, but athletes are flying to the corners and really trying to keep as much space as possible to get those particular outcomes, attacking the basket, finding that man right around the big man right around the rim for the finish, keeping the space. And then in this particular example right there, you probably would have wanted to see that kick out to the corner. You can see that athlete in the corner really sort of identify where he is on the floor to be able to maximize that. And even though that didn't happen, that spacing was good in that situation. And then same thing, just a few more clips. The ball's moving around, and the athletes are finding that target and really look to get those shots that we've been talking about. And this was something that was played around with in all of us sessions, and it was exciting to see how well they adopted it, and they did a tremendous job of picking up the concepts and incorporating it into the games. And when we saw them the following year in tryouts, many of those same spacing concepts were maintained. So that was awesome to see. So jumping ahead a little bit here and focusing in on shot type. So we've identified the shot locations on the court to provide initial context in terms of the shot spectrum. Now I'm going to drill down a little bit and provide a little bit more detail on shot type specifically. So what this means is provide a little bit of a deeper look beyond the shot location. Consider the type of shots. Of course, we've talked about this before. Not all shots are created equal. Are we talking about catch and shoot pull-up jump shots? Or sorry, are we talking about catch and shoot jump shots? Are we talking about dribble pull-up jump shots? Are we talking about shots, floaters? All of those, identifying exactly what the individual efficiencies look like for those particular shots, while keeping in mind, of course, is it a 3-pointer? Is it in the corner? Is it a paint floater? So that initial context that we set up with our shot spectrum. So the purpose of this and where this has value for us is really to key in on and identify the unique abilities of the individual athletes. So, what are their strengths and the weaknesses that they have? What are particular areas of improvement? What can we identify that they might be able to bring to the table, keeping in mind some of this objective information as you drill down into their efficiency hierarchy. So what I'm going to go through now is a hierarchy of these particular shot types to give you an idea of what this looks like. And again, this mirrors the shot spectrum that we identified earlier, but layers in, whether it's the catch and shoot, whether it's the dribble pull up, and so forth. So as we go through this hierarchy, Again, this is to give you sort of an idea of how this looks like at the best on best FIBA international competitions at the senior level. I'll also show just a few quick clips, simple clips to draw your attention to exactly what that shot might look like, to give you a little bit more information. So of course, I mean, pretty straightforward right off the bat. Your highest efficiency shot is a dunk, and then as we continue along here, we saw this one earlier, getting to the free throw line as a free throw trip, and your corner catch and shoot 3-point jump shot. So pretty straightforward, but I mean, when we're talking about the corner catch and shoot, intuitive what that might look like. Many different ways that good coaches can go about creating those looks and those opportunities, and the value that they carry is identified there at about 1.2 points per shot. Layup is the next one there. Show another clip, and again, you know, whether it's off of a cut, off of a drive, off of a putback, that's the particular the value that that shot carries. And as we can continue down here, you know, dribble jump shot from the top, same thing here. Now, with the dribble increasing a little bit of a higher level of difficulty, but a really important shot nonetheless, especially if the defense is going under in the pick and roll, having the ability to keep the dribble alive and take that shot is important. What I thought was interesting here to note as we continue along is the dribble 3-point jump shot at the top is actually, in the analysis that we did from the most recent competition, was slightly more valuable than just a catch and shoot 3-pointer at the top. So before we draw any strict conclusions, just, you know, I'd like to identify and keep in mind that FIBA sample sizes are a little bit smaller than in the NBA. And I think we can all agree that the degree of difficulty is a little bit greater in the shots that are off of the dribble than the catch and shoot. And it depends a lot on the particular athletes and the players that are involved in these actions in that specific competition. So, you know, if it was over a greater period of time, we'd probably see the catch and shoot being a little bit more valuable. And it might be the position as well, you know, whether it's a big popping for a catch and shoot might look like a little bit different than the guard. So when you have about a 7-8 game per team sample size, you might see differences in that information. Continuing along here now to about 1 point per possession, you can drill down a little bit deeper on a couple more details, not going into all of these. The paint runner floater, of course, classic subject of much debate. There's athletes that are fantastic at that shot. Again, these are average numbers, 0.8 points per possession, all the way down to the paint hook shot. And this is 0.76. A little bit trickier if you're outside of the restricted area, a difficult, high degree of difficulty shot, again, depending on the personnel. The mid-range jump shot off the dribble is another one there at the top. And of course, this is an important one. Often defenses are looking to give this shot up within the offense if they're kind of choosing what to take away. And it is important to have personnel to shoot these shots, but on average, this is a less points per shot, less valuable in terms of points per shots, and then all the way through here. So at this point, I'd like to present a little bit of how we use this information within our organization, and perhaps some ideas that might be valuable to you and your team. So what I'm going to go through in a little bit of detail here is what we call sort of the individual shot selection rating. There are many different ways that you can use this information to impact your team and your player assessment and your individual athlete assessment, and perhaps even opponents if you're looking a little bit at scouting. This is one way that we've gone about it. So not looking specifically at the shot outcome, so whether the field goal was made or missed, but rather, you know, where did it come from on in terms of location on the court specifically, and then what type of shot was it? So we talked about in terms of catch and shoot and off the dribble. So what we do with this information is generate expected values based on shot quality selection. So based on you know, the type of shot that was taken in a specific location, we'll be able to provide a value to that shot. So we know based on our research how much, what the expected points per shot is of that, and we can accumulate all of that information to get an idea of what kind of shots the athlete is taking. So an example of what that might look like is for this hypothetical athlete, player X here, and I'll go through this in a little bit. So just going down through a couple of shots. So suppose we have an athlete and they're going to take a couple, let's say 6 or 7 shots in a game. So let's say the first shot was a layup. Based on that previous efficiency hierarchy that I outlined, we know the expected value of a layup in FIBA senior national team competition at the best on best level is approximately 1.2 points per possession. Now, let's say the next shot he takes is he's able to get to the free throw line, so 1.5. we continue all the way through here, and let's say the athlete took 6 shots in this particular game. Of course, might be more, might be less, depending on the specific case. And then on the right-hand side in the column of expected values, you can see what our research tells us how much each of those shots carries. So once we have all this information, we can simply total it up and create an average. So based on player X's 6 shots that he attempted in this specific period of time that we were watching, the expected value average of all those shots was 1.2 points per shot. So this can give us a little bit of an idea of, okay, we understand what the individual values are of the particular types of shots. And this is on average in a very small sample size of 6 shots, what he looked like. So how can we use this information? Now let's consider, I mentioned previously, we're not considering at the moment whether the shot went in or not when we're calculating the expected value of all those shots. But we can add a layer here to go deeper in our analysis and see, okay, what did he actually do? So suppose that the athlete missed the first shot, missed the layup, made 1 out of 2 free throws, missed the runner, missed the floater, missed the dribble jump shot, made the 3-pointer, and then made 2 free throws down the end. So drilling down into that, we can start comparing, okay, the 7 was the expected value based on, sorry, the 1.2 was the expected efficiency based on that, the average shots that were attempted, and the 1 was the actual value. So just dividing all of those makes by the number of shots. So comparing and contrasting these differences, we can identify what was the gap. So in this individual instance, and again, reminding you, this is only 6 shots. We'll do this over the course of a training camp and over the course of the entire competition to get a little bit more volume in some of this. But to get an idea of, okay, how did that athlete look like in terms of the actual outcome? And what are really the reasons? Was it a skill gap? Was there luck involved? At the end of the day, you're going to miss some shots. And drill down within the video to identify what some of those reasons were behind some of those differences. And then we'll layer in this information in communication with the coaching staff and involve it in the athlete's individual performance plans, and be able to understand a little bit more in terms of identification and then assessment, both at the team level and at the individual athlete level. Of course, because FIBA games only happen at a specific time of year in a small window, keeping in mind what the athlete does in different contexts, for example, at the club level, at the high school level, professional, whatever that may be, to understand differences in usage and performance between those. So one thing that I'll point out, so we talked about the team assessment and the player assessment, a couple of findings that I thought were interesting that I wanted to share with you guys in terms of what we've sort of seen when using this information at the age group level. So you have the expected value of the efficiency in terms of where the shots were taken from and what type of shot was taken, and then the actual that the athlete made. So what's been interesting to see is that guards, specifically shorter players in general, on average, have been a lot more consistent in their actual performance. So the amount of points they actually scored in each of these shots when comparing it to what you would expect to see based on the types of shots that they're taking. So there's been a lot more consistency between guards and sort of athletes in that height range. However, especially at the younger age groups, so U16, U17 in particular, big athletes, so big men and forwards, often score at a much lower rate than their expected points would show. So for example, especially big men, a lot of the shots are coming around the basket. So that what you would expect is to see a high efficiency in terms of points per shot. But what actually happens, especially at the younger age groups, is a much lower rate, frequently often 0.4, 0.5 points per shot lower than you would see, than you would expect them to have based on the types of shots that were taken. So, speaking with some of the colleagues and thinking about this a little bit more, and many people I'm sure have observed this as well, is that there is actually a big gap in development from age groups, especially when comparing bigger athletes and big men towards guards, and that big men don't mature and develop at the same rate, and are often as many as 5 years behind in their development to guards. And that's some of the information that you'll see resulting in that analysis. And this doesn't really level out, we've found, until the early to mid-20s, where bigs can catch up in their production and really come onto the same playing field as the guards that develop and mature at a much faster rate. So even all that being said, the big man is crucial to the FIBA game. So developing this is going to be important, and I'm going to touch in a little bit as to why that may be the case. So just a couple of other things to keep in mind. I've underlined this a few times already, and I will do it again. This is all a small sample size. Efficiencies are averages, really, and individual players are going to be better than others in certain areas. So, you might see a lower expected efficiency for an athlete, but he's consistently showing the ability to score at that shot. That's fantastic, and that's where drilling into the video and really seeing what happens is really important. An important one is that it does not take into account the level, the contest level of the defender and where the defender is on the floor or the position of the athlete. So we're creating averages in this particular analysis on a broad scale. So, depending on where you might coach and the amount of information that you have available at your disposal, it might seem that this analysis that I showed in the previous couple of slides in terms of shot selection rating isn't feasible, or it might not even be interesting or relevant for your context. Perhaps it's really difficult to identify shot values at the particular age group that you're at, and it might seem and it might be a little bit too much work to go about watching all the video that's necessary to do that. So I propose another method that I'm sure many coaches have implemented, and I've seen this before across the country as well, simplifying some of this analysis, but still really drilling down into this the shot selection and the quality of shot analysis, because at the core is really the same thing. So, for example, a solution that might have value and relevance in some settings is setting up a simple type of scale. So, instead of looking at, okay, this particular shot is 1.2 points per possession, 1.5, whatever it may be, you can create a scale that I suggest, for example, on a 0 to 5 basis. And from there, we can set both individual and team totals. So one way of going about this, for example, is let's say that a turnover is worth 0 point on this scale. A 1 is a bad shot for this player, hasn't showed the ability in practice, for example, or in previous competitions to be able to hit that. 2, let's say this is a shot that player is able to make, but it was contested, for example. 3, open and in range. And then 4, we can start drilling into some of those additional contextual information. Maybe 4, is right at the rim is what you'd like to classify as a 4. And then finally, free throws are important. You do know that across competitions. Let's assign 5 of value to free throw attempt. Or maybe you flip rim and free throw and put them 4 and 5 as well. So over time, if you track this in live games, if you track this in practice, you can establish sort of a scale and a level and a total both for an individual player and the team that, okay, if our shot tracking chart looks at like this, if we attain a certain amount of points over the course of the game, this is when we're going to be successful. Otherwise, the shot selection, the shot quality might not have been at the level that we were looking for to drive efficient outcomes and success in this particular area. So this is information that I've seen when I've been around in some teams and with some coaches, that it's actually become part of the language of discussion in terms of the terminology. For example, okay, if our scale is 0.0 to 5, okay, we really want to get as close to 4 average as we possibly can, or 3.8. Guys, we're too close to the 2.5, we're too close to the 3, we're not getting the looks that we want and where we want them. So this has been both in communication with athletes and with other coaches on the staff, and you can track it live in games, an option that might be valuable, as opposed to, maybe if you don't have access to video data and whatever the case may be, doing a little bit more of an in-depth analysis, for example, in the shot selection rating. So another strategy or method that might be interesting or valuable to some coaches. So in recap, so far here, some of the things that we've covered, we've talked about shot location. So in terms of the shot spectrum, where is the shot being taken on the court, and then focusing in on the shot type in terms of, catch and shoot, dribble, pull up, floater, all of that, to drill down and understand a little bit more in terms of that efficiency hierarchy and what kind of shots look like in different, based on the different types of shots. So what I'd like to focus in on next a little bit here is adding a third layer of context here and thinking a little bit more about game situation. We talked about this from the get-go is really important because, a shot in transition looks a lot different than a catch and shoot spot up in the half court, than an isolation shot that's created out of pick and roll or isolation may look. So it's important to understand how the game situation and context plays into these numbers. So that's the purpose of this, is adding a little bit more context. So what I'll do, I'll go through a little bit here, is our 10 scoring actions that are standardized from video analysis to understand all of the different ways that lead to possible scoring and possession outcomes in a basketball game. So we're focusing in specifically here onto actions many of you are familiar with, I'm sure and know already, such as transition, pick and roll man, spot up, all of those standard 10 scoring actions. But keep in mind, if we're talking about pick and roll, this is not, a pick and roll, perhaps a drag at the beginning of the possession that doesn't lead to scoring out how the ball is reversed. This is context that speaks specifically to the types of action that happen directly leading to a shot attempt or a foul, a turnover, the end of a possession. So an outcome is what we're focusing on. We've standardized this information in terms of the 10 actions in order to be able to compare across contexts. So in order to be able to standardize our analysis across college, NBA, youth sports, international pros, and really speak in the same language and not have a variety of different ways to go about it, because the terms and the data that's available is the same for all of those. So these are those 10 actions I'm sure everybody's seen before and worked with a lot. And the way I've gone about organizing it, and one of the ways that we think about these actions here is in terms of shot quality from excellent, great shots, and then good shots all the way down to the bottom. So again, all of these lead to a shot attempt, which is why I've used that type of language as opposed to, for example, bad, average, and great. So there is a value that's inherent to all of these possessions, but there are some that on average are more valuable than others. So the way that we've broken down this analysis and thought about this a little bit is thinking about, okay, with all the information that we have available in terms of our shot location based on the shooting spectrum, and then the type of shot that it is, catch and shoot, pull up, etc., what are the ranges of possible outcomes that you can see in each of these situations? So, for example, if we look at all of the great shots here, the excellent shots here, most of these are going to result either in a field goal attempt, generally right around the basket, or in a three-pointer. Transition layup and or a catch and shoot in transition. A cut goes straight to the basket around the paint. Offensive rebound putback, and pick and roll man is what we qualify either as a roll right to the rim or as a pop. So if you think about these conceptually in terms of the shot location and their outcomes, most of these are either going to be layups or threes. So that's why, in general, on average, these are a lot more valuable than other shots would be as we expand a little bit down here to the red section. So spot up really in our analysis encompasses anything from a catch and shoot to attacking closeouts off the dribble, either for a finish at the basket or a pull-up. So just that notion that there is a pull-up as a possible outcome there does impact its value, because it can be a mid-range pull-up jump shot. And then all the way down to pick and roll ball handler, which we'll see in a little bit, is a crucial action, but is one of the least efficient actions if the ball handler is the one taking the shot attempt, and as I'm sure many are familiar. So moving along a little bit here into how some of this information looks like in play at the World Cup in 2019. So what this graph shows is these 10 actions from the previous slide, sorted from excellent in green on the left all the way down through to good shots on the right. The size of the bar is how often, how frequent they happen over the course of the game. So spot ups and pick and roll happen the most often. And then that line that you see is efficiency in terms of points per possession for each particular action on average. So you'll see with our excellent and great, it's a little bit higher, and then it goes down all the way through to the right to just about 0.8 points per possession for that pick and roll ball handler. So this is kind of just to provide a visual context into, what is the difference between excellent, great, and good when drilling into to these and to see, okay, these might be good shots, but they actually happen at a very frequent rate, as we see with the pick and roll ball handler. This was from the 2019 World Cup, but the same trend has been true in previous FIBA competitions, for example, the 2016 Olympics as well. So narrowing in our focus a little bit on the three actions that happen the most often, so spot up, pick and roll, ball handler, and transition, comprise almost 60% of all scoring possessions at the past FIBA World Cup. And then finally, I would like to, for the purposes of today's discussion, really drill down and focus in on the pick and roll ball handler action here. Other stuff can be talked about in some of these other actions, but in the interest of time and for today, really going to narrow in on the pick and roll ball handler. So one of the biggest trends that I've observed over the past decade in looking at FIBA international competitions is the increase in prevalence of these pick and roll possessions. So in 2010, 11% of all scoring actions were pick and roll ball handler possessions. So if you're looking at the chart, that's just about, that a little bit less than midway underneath there. In 2019, at this particular World Cup, this past September, that had increased to 21%, which is what we see here. Now, again, to remind you, this is only possessions that finished with the ball handler taking the shot attempt. We could also think about, and very important to think about, is possessions that are created out of the pick and roll but don't result in the ball handler taking the shot attempt. For example, off the pick and roll, a kick out for a spot up, or finding the roll man, finding the cutter. Any of those outcomes drive the efficiency of that pick and roll ball handler possession up and are a crucial scoring action for international competition. So if we include passes out of the pick and roll, the frequency of the pick and roll increases to almost 40% of all scoring actions at the 2019 World Cup, and this is up 10%. It was 30% at the 2016 Olympics. So drilling now a little bit deeper into that pick and roll specifically, and this is echoing again, I've mentioned Coach Chano a couple times on today's talk, but he talked a little bit about this on Friday, is the difference between the ball handler being the one scoring and then the ball, as opposed to the ball handler being the one creating, and then the other teammates being recipients of that, and what that looks like from an efficiency standpoint. So you can see these same contrasts in isolation. In different scoring actions, we're focusing specifically on the pick and roll today. So when the ball handler is scoring in pick and roll actions in 2019 at the FIBA World Cup, 0.8 points per possession. So not a very efficient shot type. However, of possessions created by the pick and roll ball handlers, so now we're talking about the spot up that comes as a result of it. The roller, it's bumped all the way up to 1.2, which makes it above average efficiency scoring action. So this was similar to the outcomes that were mentioned in the NBA. The same thing happens in FIBA, but of course, this is a tricky type of analysis, because to get to that ball handler creating outcome, you do need to have a pick and roll, and teams knowing this information, of course, will take it away and try to force you into that lower outcome shot. So, there's other alternatives then that many coaches look for, whether it's off the ball pin downs, a variety of different options. Teams have moved away from the pick and roll, but we have found in the analysis that it is still nonetheless a crucial part of that FIBA international game. And really what I'm going to drill down even deeper in this analysis is how that looks like with the roll man. And in the video review that we've done and looking at the numbers, having a big man that has the ability to roll to the rim or pop and stretch the defense is crucial to the efficiency, to having an efficient offense, most particularly in this most recent 2019 FIBA World Cup. So how does the screener impact offensive efficiency? We'll talk a little bit. And then the increase in pick and roll popper scoring has been prevalent in recent competitions. So there has been, with this jump in frequency of pick and roll actions, you've also seen an increase in the frequency of times that the big man scoring either right at the rim on a roll or on a pop. The frequency that this occurs has increased as well. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a case study now, and in terms of thinking about what we'd call dominant bigs at this past FIBA World Cup. So right here we have our three teams that were standing on the podium in September. So Spain won gold, Argentina silver, and France won bronze. All three teams were led by a dominant big man that was crucial to driving their offensive efficiency in this tournament. So we can drill into this a little bit. So Marc Gasol, Luis Scola, and Rudy Gobert are those players. If we think about the percentage of the scoring that these individual players did compared to the rest of their team, Marc Gasol was second, 17% of his team scoring. Luis Scola led the team in scoring, 21%. Rudy Gobert was third. So having an essential impact on the offensive output of their national teams. As well, free throw attempts. Remember the shot spectrum that we saw at the beginning, a crucial part of driving offensive efficiency. Each of these three players led the team in terms of total percentage of their total of the team's free throw attempts in this competition. Almost a quarter of all, and exceeding a quarter in Marc Gasol's case of all free throw attempts. So driving efficiency by getting to the rim and the foul line. Rebounding is important, both on the offensive end and on the defensive end. All three players led their teams in rebounding. And then finally, they're playing significant minutes across the board. All three are crucial, important players for their teams. So Scola and Gasol led their team in minutes in the competition. So, again, this depends a lot on particular athletes and on style of play, but it is an interesting and notable case study to see that offensive efficiency was driven by these athletes at the 2019 World Cup. All three versatile big men, nonetheless, especially Gasol and Scola, with the ability to both finish at the rim and attack, catch and shoot, and attack off the dribble from the perimeter. But big men, nonetheless, when we think about what's happened in a little bit more of a context in terms of guard-oriented perimeter attacking, driving offensive efficiency. So for both Gasol and Gobert, the pick and roll man was their highest usage scoring action, and it was top three for Scola. So it is key, again, in terms of creating efficient offense for these particular teams. And I'm going to show you a quick video here to just illustrate a little bit more on the impact that the roller has in creating these advantages on the offensive end for these teams. This going here. So Spain in this particular example, Marc Gasol, again, rolling right to the front of the rim. Rubio finds him in a tough pass right there in the pocket, or finds him underneath the rim, but we had shooters open around the perimeter. Same thing here. Gasol is unique, as is Scola, because they can both roll and draw the defense or spot up for a three-point shot outside the three-point line. Gobert here, same thing. Rolls hard right to the front of the rim, is able to finish in this particular instance, collapsing all the white shirts. But look at Gasol right over here in this instance. All the red shirts that have surrounded and that have drawn, he is a threat, and this is resulting in a wide open three-point shots around the perimeter. This is really what you're looking to get in terms of the most efficient outcomes based on our shot spectrum and all of our information that we shared earlier here. Same thing, Gobert rolling to the rim. Look at all those red jerseys in the paint. The shooter there was open. Batum was open in the opposite corner, leading to the most efficient outcomes that we can get. So the roller and the popper and having the ability to successfully drive those actions has been an important outcome in FIBA competition. So just kind of on the tail end of it here, to give you a little bit more context. So we've talked a lot about the senior national team. What does that look like from an age group standpoint? So the chart that you have in front of you here, the red bars are U16 national team at the most recent 2019 FIBA Americas at the U16 age, and then the gray is the senior men's national team from the 2019 World Cup. So you can see a little bit what these might look like in terms of how often, the frequency of these particular scoring options. So if you coach high school, you're probably seeing this as well, but most possessions, at least almost 2/3 of possessions are ending either in a spot up, attack and closeout, in transition, or maybe on an offensive rebound putback in age group, especially as young as U16 basketball. But it is notable, and this is something that we do consider and think about. If you look down all the way on the far right side of this chart, the post up and the pick and roll man, though crucial, as shown previously to the senior level and in terms of driving efficient offense and creating paint threats, so the offense is a little bit more versatile and not just guard oriented and provides another dimension to your attack, isn't driven as much at the age group level as U16. A lot of this comes down to the fact that what we discussed earlier, big men aren't really able to come in at this age and have an impact whether that's in the post or rolling to the basket, and often struggle finishing through traffic. They're a little bit more slight in stature, not as strong, and struggle finishing and maturing at a much slower rate. So it's really a balance now at that age group level of balancing that idea that you want to win, of course, but that player development and the development of these young athletes to drive possible senior national team players is crucial. So it is something we monitor in terms of our teams. How many opportunities are we getting in the actions that we know drive offensive efficiency at the senior level, and are we able to identify and develop athletes to be able to contribute to that at the next level? A couple of years down the line, you'll also see some of those differences at the U19 stage. So, a lot of these are similar. You'll see spot ups, a small decrease. Transition at U19 really drops down to the level that you'll generally see it right around what you'll see at the senior level. And then pick and roll stays about the same. And you'll see a slight increase in post up and then pick and roll action, man action. And again, as a reminder, man encompasses both the roller all the way to the rim and the popper popping outside the 3-point line. So it starts to level off a little bit more at U19. And if we think about what was mentioned earlier at the start in terms of pace and 3-point rate, it does level off closer to what it would look like. Of course, athletes are getting older. You see many senior team players are playing at the age of 19, 20, 21 years old. So it's only intuitive and makes sense to see some of these happen as well at the U19 level at the U19 World Cup. But it is also much lower, especially in the case of that pick and roll man action. So again, something to keep an eye on and think about moving forward. So with that, pretty much wraps up the topic and kind of the content that I had for today's presentation. And I'd love to hear if there are any questions. I don't know. I'm sure something was popping up there. I saw a couple of them, Tanner.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to kick us off, Phil, I mean, could you give us just a short overview of how you ended up in the position that you ended up in?
Yeah, for sure. So I have been with Canada Basketball since 2016. And I started off I went to school at McGill University, and I played for Coach DeVero there for 2 years. And then I was on his staff for another 2 years, and he gave me an opportunity to start thinking about stats and analytics as a member of his staff. And then I moved back to Toronto, where I had the opportunity to, through, again, Coach Dave and the cadet national team, participate in some of those camps and really see what it looks like in FIBA, what are the differences with youth sports, and get entrenched. And then had an opportunity a couple of years later. I started working in finance, and then had an opportunity to join Canada Basketball on a full-time basis back in 2016.
Great. From Coach Shep here. So do your pick and roll efficiency numbers suggest we should pay less attention to the ball handler defensively, i.e. not help as much on the roll, not hedge or switch more?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one, and of course it'll depend on the individual abilities of the athletes in question, depending on the team that we're preparing for in scouting. But I think that in general, that ball handler and the shot attempt coming from the ball handler is a less efficient offensive option than when that player is kicking out and finding spot up shooters, finding the roller, and whether it's in a drop defense or switch or whatever the case may be. If that individual is the one taking the shot, you are likely on average to see a less efficient outcome over time. Again, depending on the individual player in question, than you would finding that roll threat or that spot up shooter.
Sure. Another one from the attendees here. So going back to, as you talked about, the rate of increased 3-point attempts, but it doesn't necessarily lead to increased efficiency. I guess what would you equate that to? Is it lack of shooting ability, lack of shot quality?
Yeah, it is. I think that there's definitely a dimension of skill level and talent ability in that, but the shooting ability of international players is at the highest level. So I don't think that players aren't good enough to hit those shots. I think the style of play is a little bit different. And the volume as a percentage of total shot attempts hasn't really increased as much over time as we've seen necessarily in some other leagues in context in FIBA basketball. So we have seen volume 3-pointer attempts per game increase a little bit, but pace of play has increased a little bit more as well. So that overall shot distribution has been a little bit less changing over time in FIBA. And there still are teams that, drive some of the more efficient actions a little bit more. For lack of a better term, you might say traditionally than moving in the direction of some of the way the NBA has gone. But again, not a one-size-fits-all approach. Some teams have won tournaments playing many different ways. Definitely.
As you look at, we can use the most recent World Cup as an example. How much information throughout the course of the tournament is getting used, and how readily available is it? What's the process look like there?
So that's an interesting question. Again, FIBA tournaments are only a couple of games long. You have about, depending on how many games you play, it was 5 for us in September. We didn't make it to the playoff round. And I think Spain would have had 8 games winning the gold medal. So at the end of the day, the amount that you can rely on these individual data points and really what happens in the tournament themselves is limited because of that fact. So what we kind of try to do as much as possible is collect information on these athletes from other contexts. We can gather their professional numbers or college numbers, wherever they may play, and then look at previous competitions. So we tried doing this leading up to the 2019 World Cup, looking at the qualifiers as a source of information to prepare for opponents. But what ended up happening, and does happen often in FIBA competition, is that the players that end up playing in the qualifiers and play the most games in the qualifiers are not the ones that end up representing the country at the best on best World Cup. It might be a different coaching staff. It might be a whole new set of athletes. So that wasn't as useful for this past year. But in terms of how we go about gathering the information, we have some tools at our disposal to collect box score data as it happens in the FIBA competitions, and push that into a database to be able to run reports and analysis, play-by-play data to understand things such as pace, situational situations in the game, and help us prepare for that. And then as well, some of that scoring action data does get turned around very quickly from video as well, and we can use that in our preparation. And it's, as soon as one game's done, we try and collect as much information, and we'll have already reports for the next couple of games ready.
Okay. Does your research shed any light on actions or players that create the most open shots and high quality shots? For instance, what creates defenses to move or collapse the most?
Yeah, so I think that'll go back to some of those actions that we had. Now, I'm not sure if this refers to, for example, actions in a play standpoint. For example, if it's a horn set or a floppy or something along those lines. I'm not sure if that's what was referred to. In terms of scoring actions, it would have been in along the lines of what I shared with in terms of really what I'm thinking about when I look at these numbers is what creates the biggest consistent paint threat to create an advantage for other areas, whether that's a roll that draws in the defense, whether it's a cut that draws in the defense, offensive rebound, a dribble penetration might be of value. I don't think we've identified specifically certain plays that lead to that. It depends on your personnel. It depends on the style of play of the individual teams. And you try to fit all those puzzle pieces together to drive as efficient and of course, coaches are going to have an assessment in this as well, and really drive what the offensive structure should be. And we just hope to provide as much information as possible to help guide that.
Sure. Okay, last one for you. Where do you see this going? Like, what's the next step, I guess, of analysis on a FIBA level? In your capacity with Canada basketball, and then as we go bigger and broader, just in general for the game of basketball.
Yeah, another good one. I think really what I'm most excited about and really want to see over this next quadrennial for us is following through on some of our analysis from those younger age groups, and really seeing how that progresses from the junior academy level all the way through to senior national team. And are there any trends that we can identify? And there are. So making sure we've accounted for all of those. And we collect a lot of data from our junior academy athletes. I won't get into all those details now, but it's not as much kind of tactical and technical, such as pick and roll and all of that. We don't care as much about that as, the fundamental skills that are involved in that, and some of the performance numbers. So, body movement and all of that, and how can we kind of trend or identify trends over time with as much data that we can collect to follow these progressions and be able to better identify, when a young athlete comes in, what would that look like in terms of possible progressions and outcomes over time, and what really makes an athlete at the senior national team level. What I talked about today has been mostly focused in on tactical performance data, but a huge untouched component that I didn't mention as much today is that performance data. And you have anything from the NBA combine tests that you might see to heart rate monitor, all of that, the variety of tests that we can combine all of that as much as possible to try and predict and understand performance better at the international basketball level.